Okay. Hello, I'm Tatev, and we're here at Rhizome DC Tacoma Park location.
Yes.
I have the honor to interview Peter Redgrave, an artist, a performer, a workshop facilitator here at Rhizome. We will talk about memories and visions forward, and in the spirit of embracing the beauty and humanity of our memory and how we make meaning of the world, we're just gonna start with, and we're gonna locate the story, locate you as the center of the story. So we will begin at the beginning. So with that, let's start with you telling me a little bit about who you are, where you are from. Take us back.
Well, all the way to the beginning. I was born outside London. My mother's American. My father is English. So my father worked in the hotel trade for some time. My mother was in England after graduating from college. She came from New Jersey. Her father was a first generation. He was born in the United States to German metalworking, sort of old. His father, my great-grandfather, was a representative of a German company that made cutlery. My grandfather transformed that company to make surgical instruments right before World War II. So I was born in England in 1971. I moved to this country in 1977 or 76. 76, because it was the bicentennial of America.
Do you remember that move?
Oh,
you were
yes.
age 6,
Yes.
7?
Yeah, very much so. I remember we couldn't bring our cat,
Oh no.
little Percy.
What happened to Percy?
Percy stayed in Surbiton in a suburb of London. And yeah, we arrived first to New Jersey, to where my mother's family was, and we were there for 6 months or so. I started school there, first grade. And then we moved down here, actually, to Wheaton. We lived for a little bit in the hotel where my father was working, the Sheraton, Washington, which is there to this day.
When was this?
This was 1977. We were probably...
Oh, okay, so soon after you came from...
Oh, yes. So we got here in 1976 in the spring. It must have been the summer, because we celebrated July 4th in England, which was, I can remember a family friend carrying in a tea chest, and then the daughter, who was a little older than me, bursting out of the tea chest and throwing tea at us and saying, "Keep your bloody tea!" Yeah, and then we arrived here, and went to school here. Lived on the West Coast briefly. We moved around a lot because my father was in the hotel business. So we really went. So we came from New Jersey down here, and then when I was in 5th grade, we went to LA again for a very short amount of time, and then my parents divorced, and we came back to the same house. There was a housing crunch, so they had tried, or not a crunch, like a collapse of the housing market in 1981. So we were able to move my mother was able to buy the house back from the hotel company for the, like with, and again, I don't know the details of all of that. All I know as a child, right, was we moved away. Yeah. And then we moved back literally into the same house.
Yeah, yeah. Was it nice to come back to the house since like moving, like was some sense of familiarity? How do you recall that?
So I always liked moving as a kid. I mean, we moved here when I was 6. We moved to LA when I was 9. I had friends in New Jersey, and I had, and I loved that. I loved like looking at the maps of where we were going to go and imagining what the new place was going to be like, and then you know, you get there, and I never. I'm not one to look back with. I mean, that's not entirely true, I suppose, but I'm a pretty positive person, and I think a lot of that comes from that time, right? Like my mother was very grounded and very buoyant, remains so. She lives in Baltimore now. Huge influence on me, actually, my mother. Very supportive person of all of my ways of being in the world.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, oh, it absolutely is. And yeah, so I was so most of my schooling was in Montgomery County, outside DC. Not far from here. I had friends that lived in Tacoma Park.
Yeah.
And yeah, so went to an arts magnet high school in Montgomery County, and then left there and went to Chicago in 1989, and then spent 7 years in Chicago. I went to the School of the Art Institute, so remained in the visual arts, and did some, and also spent a year during my college time in England. My father had moved back to England in that time, so that was really great. Got to reconnect with him and with my British family, and we had stayed in touch off and on. My father is very much a person who is comfortable in social situations, someone who floats through a room and is very good at making other people comfortable, and someone who is very good at, I mean, there's a reason he was in the hotel trade for so long.
So your first experience moving to DC was moving into a Sheraton Hotel, yes, where your dad worked.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so that, I have thought a lot about that actually, because he was young. He jokes that he was because again, this was the late 70s, mid 70s. He talks about being a first generation yuppie. He was sort of in his 20s, but what's interesting about that is he didn't go to high school, right? He did a training program at a hotel in London that started when he was 13.
Wow.
So he moved, he started in the kitchen and did sort of sous chef and pastry chef work, and then moved into management, right, sort of as a young adult, like really young, 20, 21. Started managing personnel for the kitchen, and then started, by the time he was 24 and here, he had 3 children, and was doing things like writing manuals for like how to do team building, essentially, is what we would call it now. Yeah. But that kind of language was not common, or my understanding is that kind of language was not common. So he thought a lot about that, about how to, and again, it was all in the service of corporate interests, I suppose. I don't know, like corporate development, but really thinking about how to distribute leadership and how to help people work together, like in the service of their endeavor.
Yeah, so and this endeavor brought you to DC.
Yes.
From the UK, so he's English, I imagine.
Yes. Yes.
How was that? How was that for him, moving continents?
So as I said, so when my parents split up, he floated then, and he was very, like I said, very comfortable with people. Yeah, always good at making friends and how do I say? Helping other people meet their entertainment needs. Oh. So he was happy to provide you with any substance you were looking for. So did a lot of illicit work, getting cocaine for people in the 80s in the hotels, and partaking in all of that. So he liked to party. And I say it like that partly because I really do think that he thought about like the energy of the group and thought about like keeping everybody satisfied and so and keeping the party going in a way. And in his, so when he left, because he kind of crashed and burned with Sheraton. And when he left that, he ended up going back to the UK and running a pub for a while and helping his older brother with a restaurant. And I think that is all important in my own sort of sense of myself, and the sense of the kind of work that that I am interested in. And it really, it was interesting to me to find out about his work with facilitation in a way, right? Because that is also something that's very important to me. One of the things that I did in DC, or in Wheaton, I was very involved in the skateboarding community. Made fanzines and spent a lot of time driving around, and at that time, right, in the late 80s, it wasn't it was building back up again to be a huge industry, but it was kind of coming out of this, so it's still very, like the fanzine thing was real. And
what is that?
So zines or fanzines are homemade magazines, right?
Okay. I just didn't separate the two words. I was like, fanzine. What's a fanzine? Okay.
Yeah, so that's where that comes from. The zine thing started at fanzines. So we would mail them back and forth all across the country, right, to people.
Do you remember how you started getting involved in this practice?
Yeah, I had a great friend who was a writer named Josh Russell, and he and myself and my younger brother made a fanzine, a zine called Spud. Spud. And
at what age?
Oh, I was 14, 15.
Okay.
And yeah, so, and what was, Josh was very interested in sort of, everybody, let's all do it together. Like, so it was very much a community thing, right? We did that together for many years, and then Josh went to the University of Maryland. He was a few years older than me, and began writing to a different degree and stopped skating. He broke his elbow when he was a senior in high school, like kind of did some real damage, and sort of stepped away from skating after that.
So the zines were evolving around like skating topics?
Oh yes, skateboarding and like places to skateboard and people that were skateboarding and poetry and photographs and art and this.
Can you tell me about that community a little bit actually? What were the places to skateboard in DC and Wheaton?
Well, Malcolm X Park.
Yeah?
Oh yeah, so we looked forward to when they drained Malcolm X Park. That was, so at that point there's a lot of skateboard parks everywhere, right? But that was at a time when there were very few. So we would drive up to Baltimore. There's one that's been there since the late 70s. In Lansdowne, Maryland. We would go there. We would skateboard in what was then Pulaski Park. Now it's got some name like Freedom Plaza or something like that. So yeah, I spent a lot of time with my mother at that point was going to law school, had a kid in college and 2 kids at home, was kind of working all day, going to law school at night.
The ladies, man, they always do it.
You know it? It's so...
Look at this one carrying the ginormous cameras that I'm telling her to not carry.
You can't keep people down, right? Like, and women do all of the labor, right? That's part of the reason that I said my mother is a huge influence. She, through the sort of support of her own family and through her, like I said, she worked 9 to 5 at the National Association for Manufacturers as a secretary, dealt with all the nonsense of like working in this sort of male world, and then coming home and dealing with us.
So when she was at work, and I imagine that at this point your parents were separated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who was taking care of you during the day?
School during the day, and then for a while she had a family friend kind of looking in on us that would sort of come hang out at our house because she was like away from the house and until 6 or 7, and so this was an older teenager, and she would kind of hang out and just make sure we were all right, like have someone to check in, and I'm sure my mother paid her. And then by the time I was in 10th grade, that had stopped. So that went on for a long time, actually, right? Because she sort of kept an eye on us for a long time.
Yeah.
And then we sort of looked after ourselves. At that point, right, we were skateboarding all over the place. So like out in parking lots and in drainage ditches. Or up and down the East Coast. Yeah.
Was it a big community of folks? Are you in touch with them now?
Yes. So when I moved to Chicago, the first folks that I met there were also skateboarding folks, and then people from the high school that I went to. So I stayed with some folks from my high school. And a man named Damon Locks, actually. And
I know a musician named that.
That's him, who does the Black Monument Ensemble.
Incredible stuff.
Yeah.
I love his music.
He's an inspiration, actually.
Yeah, Chicago artist, of course.
Yeah, right. But he's from outside DC.
Wow.
Yeah, he did that same art program. I knew him in high school.
You said Chicago Art Institute at Chicago.
Yeah.
What exactly did you do? Tell me a little bit about that.
So I did printmaking and photography, right, which is work that has remained sort of percolating. In the end, I made books, right? So the sort of fanzines have remained like a practice of mine in a way. And I really see that technology as a way to share ideas and share the fanzine things. I mean, that's another thing that we gave them all away, right?
Yeah.
We would ask people to pay shipping, like if they were we would mail them to other people and trade them, and then a lot of that community was like you'd put your address in the back, and so if people were like, oh, I'm coming to DC, I want to go skate, like where should I go? They would write us letters, or they'd send us their zines, and then we would go see them. So it took tons of road trips, like out to Chicago, and hooked up with folks out there all along the way, right? Someone in Indiana that we'd met, someone in Lincoln, Nebraska that we'd exchanged zines with, in Milwaukee.
Wow.
When
And it was just by word of mouth? How did the...
Well, essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Because you would get a zine, and they would have like other zines listed, right? Lots of times zines would do like zine reviews. So you would see like, or they'd say like, thanks to Luke from Contort Zine for sending us these pictures. And then you'd be like, oh, Contort. And then at the time too, larger magazines like Thrasher or Transworld, they would also have like zine reviews and ways to get in touch with folks. So it was in a way, right, it's kind of a mail art community where people would mail things to each other, mail collages, mail poetry, mail photographs, and that was a huge part of it. It wasn't the part that I was always the best at. I'm my father's child.
What was your bit? What were you doing? Were you writing? Were you taking photos? Were you arranging them?
So I was skating for sure all the time, and then I ended up doing a zine of my own when I went to Chicago called Worm Zine, and that was more, I sort of thought of that more holistically. It would, so there were photographs of skateboarding. It was sort of centered in the skateboarding community, but it didn't have the sort of standard tropes. It was more like these kind of small book collages. I was already thinking collectively, so everyone who contributed would be listed in the back. Their individual contributions were less named. It was sort of, I thought of it as a whole. And I have mixed feelings about that now. I think there's sort of a funny, when you're the person who's organizing something and you ask other people for contributions and then you list everybody as contributors in the back but don't say exactly what they did, it becomes, so then it's Worm Zine, right, that people may associate with me directly. And in a way, I see that now as a little appropriative, because it's sort of that work draws me to the center. So I try to be more, these days I try to be more explicit in saying like who did what and how, unless it's said from the beginning that this is a collaborative project, and I try to make that clear at the beginning, so that to honor people's labor, right? Like, because there's too many circumstances where, especially as a white male-bodied person, I get to stand in the center of the room with bright lights on me and say, look at my work. And where there's really like a community of people. There's my mother's family. My mother continues to support me when I hit the bottom, right? In all kinds of ways. And that support is not leveraged for everybody. So, and that has been painfully clear in the last year, right? I've had a very relaxed pandemic time, despite being booted out of unemployment. So like a lot of, but yeah, I'm fine, right? Like I have resources because of my family. I have resources because of the kind of work I've done, right? So I'm very fortunate.
Cool. Let's see, so the zines, that's so cool that it started as a young person, you just skated and like started kind of creating, and then it brought you into the art school. So
yes,
we talked about Chicago. Let's tell me more how let's like slowly build it up to your current practice and how that came into.
So as I said, in Chicago I had the Worm Zine, and then as I mentioned, I went to England. I took a year and went to Brighton. And that also sort of recalibrated things a little bit. The program there was more based in conceptual art. So really thinking about ideas, thinking about mass production, thinking about the commodification of art. All of that got focused in England in this last time. And when I came back, I took a year off of school. I worked at a skateboard distributor, and then when I returned to school, I met a collaborator that was very important to me, a woman named Heather Romney, and together we started doing performance work together. I was also playing music at the time and in a band that would also become very important for me, played with them for many, many years.
What kind of music were you guys playing?
So I played the trumpet. We were sort of like a punk rock marching band, although, and sort of free in some sense. There were song structures, but it was loose, and we had a set. We did 3 sets overall, 3 different pieces, so to speak, but they were long form pieces. So they had sections that were song-like, but we played them straight through. So it was like a 30-minute piece that we would just play from beginning to end. And we had these sort of marching band uniforms, and that was a project called Mother Country Death Rattle, and sort of spoke to the sort of mental framework of the nation state being an embodied, and again, that wouldn't have been language I used at the time, but we sort of talked about the tract. There is a tract in the brain where guilt and fear reside. I want to get out of this place, right? So really thinking even then about, again, the language I would use now is this embodied sense of white supremacy. We sort of thought about it at the time as the sort of reaches of state control, and this sort of poetic sense of the death rattle of that. And one of the shows we did, we did very performatively. We I think in some sense the high water mark, there was one where there were 2 of us that wore these, we skinned the head of a pig, and I wore the pig skin over my face along with another friend, and we had then an effigy of Uncle Sam, and we gave out these sort of cards that said the executioner and the executed wear the same mask, and we smoked everybody out. Put a smoke bomb in the mouth of, because there were 3 pig's heads, one I was wearing, one a friend was wearing, and one that was still the whole pig's head on the same uniform that we were wearing, sitting in front of us. We put a smoke bomb in the mouth of that.
How did you find the pig's heads?
Well, there are butchers that will sell the whole pig's head.
Okay. In Mexico, you'll see them hanging. I have a very nice picture of 2 pigs, like almost like it looks like they're kissing each other.
Yeah.
It's very graphic. Pigs' heads are very graphic.
Yes, and it was quite an experience to wear the face of another animal over my face, and to like put my horn through the snout of this pig, and to not really be able to see. And
was the skin like dried? How?
Nope. We had smoked those a little bit, so I smelled like bacon for a few days afterwards. And everybody else did too, because that smoke bomb like filled the room with this sort of bacon smoke.
What was the reaction?
People were a little alarmed. Yes.
Is that something that you can trace in your practice, like kind of?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and that's a good question, actually. So, like, if you skip forward to sort of 2010, I'm a public school teacher in Baltimore. I've just moved back to the United States from 8 years living abroad, and I'm still performing with Heather, the person that I mentioned, and I start taking dance classes. I have a severe ankle injury from skateboarding, and to rehabilitate, I started taking dance classes. And that sort of made a pretty dramatic shift in the way that I work. And then I developed this vocabulary of embodied knowledge, and start really thinking about the embodied mind, and start thinking about the resonance of nervous systems, and how when you are in proximity with other people, like actually in the same room, that it is that part of what live performance does is create these experiences where nervous systems resonate. And that one of the ways to think about performance that I'm very interested in is as a tool to help harmonize and bring nervous systems to a collective state. So this sense of animating the collective nervous system in this very jarring way that in my own work since then, both like in performances done here where there's like abrupt changes, very physical performances, people react in very different ways when you alter your own body, when you put your own body, even if the situation looks very safe. Like I've done a lot of falling down performances, is one of the things that I've done a lot of over the last sort of 10 years. I've fallen down these stairs many times, or one particular performance, like a bunch of times, just yeah, and the sort of the sound of that and the way that people react.
You didn't hurt yourself?
No, I was pretty lucky that time. Yeah, so but that's the thing, that you, like the way, for example, you sat up, you didn't hurt yourself, you sat up straight, like just the idea that somebody is, like the sound of a body hitting the floor and what that does to everybody else in the room, that is something I'm still very much interested in. I don't do the falling down stuff anymore. Yeah, that's another tangent.
Yeah, that's interesting though. Is it like do you think shock, or what is it? What is it about that creates such a resonance?
So I think there's a sense of caring. There's a sense of people wanting to, and I think part of that is nonverbal, and really reaches to the collective mind. In a way that is outside of language. Okay. And those responses are individuated and based on what you bring, right? So some people see things like that and they want to watch. Other people see things like that. Like, for example, when I did the thing falling down the stairs here, there was a person sitting right at the bottom of the stairs. It made them very uncomfortable. Yeah. And they moved, they left. I mean, they didn't leave. He was one of the performers that night, but yeah.
And discomfort is a part of our existence, isn't it? Yeah, let's actually talk about this. Why not? Let's talk about, we're talking about dance. We can talk about Move Collaborative. How about?
Yes, in 2016, when my partnership with Heather sort of came unraveled, which was great. I'm still very good friends with Heather. We still do all kinds of things, and dance had become a more prominent part of my life. I wanted to perform. I wanted to experience different ways of dancing and different ways of performing. And so I went to Germany and did a 10-day dance intensive with a Butoh artist named Tadashi Endo. And it was a very inspiring experience to be with a group of people, 20 people, 25 people, for 10 days, doing very physically demanding work. And when I came back, I really wanted to facilitate an experience like that. The thing that I wanted to be very different, however, was one of the questions that has driven me through my life is it possible for humans to work in a leaderless group? And so that question animated my teaching career. That question has animated my artistic endeavors, things like the zines, where working together to try to create one object from disparate elements. And then in performance, the Move Collaborative is one expression of that. So we're about to gather for the 5th one. We did 3 in person. It happens in June. In pre-pandemic times, we would rent a space and we would spend 10 days offering workshops for each other, and get people from all over. In 2019, we had people from Spain, we had people from the UK, we had people from Chicago, as well as a wide variety of folks from Baltimore. And then, came together. We did 2 shows that year. We did a show here, which was incredible, 5 musicians back here, had an incredible dance in the kitchen. Like, the audience was all around.
Was the audience also engaged in the dance, or?
What's that?
Was the audience engaged in the movement itself?
Well, in that one, the audience was engaged mainly because there was some seating, but there was a lot more people. We were in the house and out of the house. We sort of came from outside the house into the house. And that's one thing about this particular space that has also been a part of many of the collaborations that I'm involved with. So the most of the performing that I've done here has been with a man named Christian Weeks. And Christian and I do sort of score-based performances where one we did here was called the Runaround, the old Runaround, where every time I came into the house, he would play a recording that was incidental music from soap operas, with all the talking cut out, so it got all chopped up. And then I would bolt out of the house, run around the house, and come back in, and the music would start again, and I would sort of move for a little bit, and then I would bolt. They've encouraged us to do things, climb in the windows. There's a ladder here somewhere that has a little poem to us. We've done lots of things on ladders. One of our pieces is called Feet Off the Floor, where we try to traverse a space without touching the floor. So like chairs and ladders and tables, and Christian puts them in front of me, and I try to step without looking where I'm stepping, so that it becomes this collaboration and it's back to this idea that the audience is then feeling like, is he gonna fall, is he gonna fall? And that one is actually quite safe. I'm usually not very high off the floor. We have done it with things like ladders in taller spaces where I'm further off the floor, but even then, like, it's it's pretty, like, I'm not trying to hurt myself.
Mm-hmm.
I swear. So it's, and this space has really animated that kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the falling down the stairs, the running around the house, the using the sounds of furniture, all of the ways that, like climbing through different places, they've encouraged all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the places that, I mean, I've performed in some places where people have been like, well, what are you doing? You can't do that here. Mm-hmm. Like, you're supposed to be on the stage.
Yes.
Go, get back on the stage. And I value that very deeply because of what that offers for an audience, right? You have this sense of actually feeling another body much closer to yours, a body that you're not quite sure how in control they are. And what that offers is an opportunity for people to feel things
Mm-hmm.
that they wouldn't feel without that.
Yeah.
And that those opportunities are rare.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell a little more about, just more about any other performances and encouragements in the space of Rhizome itself, accommodating this
yes.
various modes of performances for you?
So, one of for me personally, the way that they have transitioned out in pandemic times has been a real inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
They have really worked to maintain their community. They've continued programming and adapted. And I don't know if you heard, I was joking with Lane, like they were my only paying income for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
So Lane had offered long ago, because Lane was aware that I had been a teacher. I'd worked in schools for 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
worked outside of schools for 10 years before that. So I've got a lot of experience and a lot of interest. And Lane had suggested if I ever wanted to do anything for their summer camps, or if I ever, that he would welcome that. And this, in pandemic times, I offered first a summer class for kids online,
Mm-hmm.
and then
What were you teaching?
I called it Experiential Biology first, and
Uh-huh.
Experiential Science. And the idea is really that, again, the body and all of our senses and how we integrate our experience of the world is actually fundamental to how we understand knowledge at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that the first one with biology was really thinking with being in the presence of other life,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling the way that life reaches into you.
Mm-hmm.
So, like feeling the way plants move, feeling the ways that, like when you watch a jellyfish,
Yeah.
right? And then imagine your diaphragm, your breathing apparatus as a jellyfish.
Mm-hmm.
How that changes your own relationship to your own body. And so that was what those experiences like that, offering those for young people.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it was, they were the only people offering me a platform to do that kind of work. It's also work I'm very interested in, like really trying to, young people are often encouraged to be text-based. A lot of the ways that we understand knowledge is like, can you read, can you write? And those things draw people away from their direct experience of the world and of other life forms. And that is something I'm very interested in right now.
Yeah.
That our nervous systems connect with other nervous systems, whether they're other people or not. We breathe differently when we're in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
We breathe, like really fundamentally, what our movement is made of is different when we're in the presence of running water.
Yes.
When you're in the ocean. Like those things are very physical.
Mm-hmm.
and through my dance classes, my dance work, I've been really fortunate to have experiences with teachers and mentors that have encouraged me to feel my body in a way that reflects that, and that Rhizome has helped me develop and given me a platform to share that understanding and to work on ways to teach that, and to be in dialogue with young people around that.
Yeah. So let's talk about movement in a different sense here.
Yes.
Now that this house will be physically moved to
Yes.
give space to some development in
Yes.
space, how do you see the movement forward for Rhizome's community, for your own practice and your own existence as a community member of this space?
I will deeply miss this actual building and space.
Yes,
right?
tell me about the physical space. I mean, you did,
Yes.
because you played with it. You
Absolutely.
incorporated it
Absolutely.
deeply, falling down the stairs and all.
Yeah, I danced on the roof up there at one time. So that is the thing that I think will be hardest to replicate somewhere else, right? I am quite confident that the people that run Rhizome will find another home. And because of their capacity to adapt during pandemic times, I'm quite confident that they will, to the degree that they're interested, that they will keep the community alive in some way. I cannot imagine that they will have access to a space like this, and that they will provide access to a space like this. I mean, I came in for a show once with the room where you're sitting now is completely covered with names of people killed by police, right? Like,
Laura was actually just talking about that.
And so, and again, some of those things are tropes that art galleries do. But what is so unique about this space is, yes, it functions in this in-between community center art gallery space, but it's a house. It's a domestic space. The kitchen, the stairs, the railings, the architectural details are a domestic space.
Yes.
So, and again, to speak back to that sort of sense of an embodied feeling of being in a space, yes, I understand this to be an art gallery. There's a plinth with a telephone on it that's a little too small, right? There's frames on the wall, but also...
There's a kettle boiling in the kitchen.
Right. It's always boiling. The way that you move through the space, though, is just different because it's a domestic space, and I think that will be the thing that I will miss most. And again, it's the space and the people and the way that they have managed to maintain this open sense of community. And hopefully they will be able to transition to a space where there will be more Black and brown people, and that they will be able to be in more direct dialogue with bringing a sense of the avant-garde out of just like a white neighborhood like Tacoma Park.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. So I think really thinking with the opportunities that this offers is something that I think I would hope that they're doing.
Yeah. How do you see, so absolutely agree on that point with you, and just kind of creating more of this open and safe spaces, for
Yes.
individuals to be able to both experiment in the shapes and forms of how performance, but also to have this variety of experiences represented.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how you see that actualized.
Yes.
If you can reflect on that, please.
So that is the trick, right?
Yeah.
That especially as a middle-aged white male-bodied person, my perspective of that there's work I have to do,
Yes.
right? That to sort of acknowledge how I'm fortunate and the privileges that I bring and what my body brings into any space that I'm in, right?
Yeah.
That I don't just walk in as somebody who, like you can't see that, right? Like I come in, I bring the patriarchy and white supremacy in with me. So I have to become comfortable with that, and the other white organizers need to become comfortable with that, and need to really evaluate how the funding works. And it's not just about funding, but I think that is one way to sort of see that you're offering not just opportunities for Black and brown folks to perform, but also ways to actually make Black and brown folks partners in the sort of structure of the space, so that there are events that happen that are curated by Black and brown folks, that there may be, and I hope that there would be times when white folks don't necessarily feel comfortable, that there's, and DC has an incredible tradition, right, of go-go and all kinds of Black culture that is really still predominantly Black culture. And so finding ways, and not that it has to be go-go necessarily, but that there's spaces and ways for Black and brown folks to make the culture that they want, and that that it's not always an invitation like into the white world, right? Because that's still just an invitation into the white world, and that if it's really a partnership, then in a space, then that space needs to be mutable and needs to be able to host and accommodate diverse sets of folks.
Yeah. Physicals. I think my questions as far as about the space are covered. You're so insightful. Tell me if I haven't covered anything, if there is something that you would like to yourself reflect on about this community, about the various ways you've been involved with it, and maybe some visions forward. I'm just going to close my book.
Well, I just hope to continue to be involved. I hope to continue to, I've been here mainly as a performer. I'm also one of the CSA artists, and I hope that.
What is the CSA?
So the CSA is a joint production between Rhizome and Gilded. And Gilded is a freelancers, workers co-op, is my understanding of it so far. And so what they're offering is, there's 9 artists, and we are each responsible for providing 50 of something. And there's Rhizome is the sort of hub that is selling 50 shares of this CSA. And again, I think it's another great example of the way that Rhizome is sort of thinking much more expansively. It's really a fundamentally different way of a consumer being in relationship with the artists that are making the culture that is being consumed. So as a patron, you buy a share and you get one of these objects from each of, and they're not all objects, but one of these pieces from each of the 9 artists. And then Rhizome really becomes then the community facilitator for that. They're also, through Gilded, they're offering health benefits and tax help, right, which is often really complicated and messy for freelance folks.
Absolutely.
So they're really thinking holistically about what does it mean to have a sustainable, like, creative, vibrant, thriving community, and really operating from that. And I think with that at their heart, I think they're moving in ways that is very powerful and inspiring.
Beautiful. I think I'm good, man. I'm like, we're good. Yeah. Is there anything that I'm missing that is crucial?
No.
I just like, it's been just 3 interviews so far, and all of your perspectives are so different and so insightful and interesting to me. I'm looking forward to just like rewatching all of it. And
well, thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your work, right? This is a lot of labor. So both of you, thank you very much.
yeah.